Every time you react emotionally, you hand someone a map, not a metaphor, not a figure of speech, an actual map of what matters to you, what threatens you, what you'll protect at all costs, and exactly how far someone needs to push before you stop thinking clearly. Most people spend their entire lives handing this map out freely. In arguments, in negotiations, in casual conversations they didn't even realize were tests. They react, they reveal, they wonder later why they always seem to end up on the back foot. The answer isn't that they're weak, it's that they're readable. And readable people are easy to steer. Think about the last time you got genuinely angry in front of someone. Not privately, not in your car alone, publicly, visibly, where the emotion moved through you fast enough that you didn't choose it. It just happened. In that moment, you told the room something important. You told them what you value enough to defend. You told them what kind of pressure produces a response in you. You told them how quickly you move from composed to reactive and how long it takes you to come back down. You didn't mean to tell them any of that. You were just reacting. That's the point. The people paying attention, and some people are always paying attention, filed that information away. Not because they're calculating or sinister, though some of them are, but because human beings are wired to study each other. We read emotional responses the way a tracker reads ground. We look for patterns. We look for pressure points. We look for the places where someone's surface breaks. And when we find those places, we remember them. Here's the part most people never consider. Manipulation doesn't require a manipulator. What it requires is predictability. When your emotional responses are consistent enough, automatic enough, reliable enough, anyone around you long enough will eventually learn how to produce those responses. Not through evil intent, but through basic pattern recognition. The same way you learn that a certain friend always shuts down when you bring up a particular topic. The same way you know that your colleague gets defensive the second their judgment is questioned. You've learned those patterns about other people. You navigate around them, or occasionally through them, without much conscious thought. Other people have learned your patterns too. They know what makes you go quiet. They know what makes you go loud. They know what kind of comment will make you explain yourself for 10 minutes when a single sentence would have been enough. They know which accusations you can't ignore, which comparisons sting, which silences make you uncomfortable enough to fill. That reaction told them more about you than you realized. The word control has a bad reputation. It sounds cold, mechanical, like something that strips the warmth out of a person. But emotional self-control isn't the absence of feeling. It's the gap between feeling and responding. That gap, sometimes it's a second, sometimes it's a breath, sometimes it's just a decision made in the space before the mouth opens. That gap is where your power lives. Most people don't have that gap. Their stimulus and response are fused. Something happens, they react. Something is said, they answer. An emotion arrives, and it immediately expresses itself outward, visibly, informing everyone watching exactly what just moved through them. That fusion is what makes a person readable. And the thinner that gap, the more accurately someone else can predict and therefore manage your behavior. Think about the people in your life who seem impossibly hard to rattle. Not cold people, not robotic people, but the ones who just don't seem to get destabilized the way everyone else does. The ones who, when something goes wrong, seem to process it inwardly before anything shows on the surface. The ones who, in an argument, somehow manage to stay in the conversation without being consumed by it. Those people aren't less emotional than you. They haven't gone numb. They've built a gap. And that gap is the single most protective thing a person can develop. There's a reason experienced negotiators are trained to control their physical responses before anything else. Before strategy, before language, before technique. The first skill is stillness, because if your body signals your emotional state before you speak, the other party already has the information they need to work with. It's not just negotiators. Watch skilled therapists. Watch experienced doctors delivering difficult news. Watch the people who consistently perform well under pressure in any field. What you'll notice is not that they feel less. It's that the feeling doesn't move immediately to the surface. There's a translation process happening between what arrives and what gets expressed, and that process is controlled. That control isn't suppression. It isn't denial. The feeling is there. They're aware of it. They're just choosing when and how and whether it becomes visible. That's the difference between emotional discipline and emotional shutdown. One of them protects you. The other one slowly destroys you from the inside. What we're building here is the first. So what does this map actually contain? Your triggers, the specific subjects, tones, accusations, or behaviors that reliably produce a strong reaction in you. Your tells, the physical and verbal signals that appear before you've consciously decided to respond. The jaw tightening, the pause that runs a beat too long, the voice that lifts slightly in pitch, the over-explanation that only arrives when you feel accused. Your defenses, the things you will always protect, the lines you will always hold, the values you'll argue for even when the argument stops serving you. Your wounds, the old injuries that make certain present-moment events land harder than they logically should. The comment that stings out of proportion because it echoes something you've been carrying for years. Every person walking around has all of this. The difference between people who get controlled and people who don't isn't the presence or absence of these things. It's awareness. The person who doesn't know their own map hands it out constantly. In their reactions, their explanations, their overdefenses, their silences. They give a detailed tour of their interior architecture to anyone patient enough to observe. The person who knows their map guards it, not out of coldness, not out of distrust, but out of the simple understanding that some information, emotional information especially, is only safe in certain hands. This audiobook is about building that understanding into something operational, something you can actually use in the conversations that matter, under the pressure that's real, with the people who have, consciously or not, been using your emotional predictability against you. It starts with a single, uncomfortable question. How readable are you right now? Not how you'd like to be, not how you present yourself, but how readable you actually are to the people who've been watching long enough to know. The answer to that question is the beginning of everything, because you can't guard a map you don't know you're carrying. Section 2. Why emotional people lose power without knowing it. Nobody pulls you aside and tells you. That's the part that makes it so damaging. There's no moment where someone sits across from you and says, your emotional reactions are costing you credibility. No one explains that the outburst last Tuesday changed the way 3 people in that room think about you. No one tells you that you've been quietly removed from certain conversations, not out of malice, but because you've become unpredictable, because managing your reactions has become part of the overhead of working with you, living with you, dealing with you. It just happens, quietly, gradually, and by the time you notice something has shifted, the shift has already been in place for a long time. Here's how it works. The first time you react emotionally in front of someone, really react, visibly, in a way that's disproportionate to the moment, they make a small mental note. They don't judge you harshly. They chalk it up to a bad day. They give you the benefit of the doubt, the way reasonable people do. The second time, the note gets a little heavier. By the third or fourth time, it's no longer a note. It's a category, and the category is unpredictable, or sensitive, or reactive. The specific word varies. The effect is the same. They start adjusting. They choose their words more carefully around you, not out of respect, but out of caution. They stop bringing you certain kinds of information because they've learned that the delivery will be harder than the problem itself. They start filtering what they share, softening what they say, managing your emotional state as a background task in every interaction. They're not doing this consciously most of the time. It's just calibration. Human beings calibrate constantly to the emotional environments around them. And when someone becomes a source of unpredictable emotional weather, the people around them learn to dress for it. What looks like consideration is often containment. There's a particular kind of power loss that emotional reactivity creates, and it's different from what most people imagine when they think about losing power. It isn't dramatic. It isn't a single confrontation that goes badly. It's quieter than that. It's the meeting where the hard question gets directed to the person across the table from you, not you, because everyone already knows how you'll respond. It's the conversation that happens after the conversation, the one you're not in, where the real decisions get made. It's the slow migration of trust and responsibility toward the people in the room who seem like they can hold pressure without leaking it. It's being managed instead of consulted. And the most disorienting part is that emotionally reactive people are often the most passionate people in the room, the most invested, the most genuinely committed to the outcome. But passion without composure reads as instability. Commitment without control reads as liability. And over time, no matter how much someone cares, if they can't regulate how that caring expresses itself, they get quietly moved to the side. Not fired, not confronted, just sidelined. Think about the people in your life who hold real, durable authority. Not just title or position, actual authority. The kind where their opinion changes the direction of things. Where their presence in a room raises the quality of what happens in it. Now think about how those people handle difficult moments. Almost universally, they don't match the emotional temperature of what's around them. When things get chaotic, they get quieter. When someone escalates, they slow down. When the room is anxious, they become the point of stillness everyone else unconsciously orients toward. This isn't a performance. It's not strategic in the moment. It's trained. It's built. It comes from having decided, somewhere along the way, that their internal state is not going to be at the mercy of external events. And the social effect of that decision is enormous. People trust calm, instinctively, almost involuntarily. When you're in genuine distress and someone near you is composed, not dismissive, not cold, but genuinely steady, your nervous system responds to that steadiness. You settle slightly. You think more clearly. You feel, without being able to fully explain why, that this person knows something you don't. That's not an accident. Calmness signals competence. Regulated emotion signals self-mastery. And self-mastery, real self-mastery, not performance, is one of the rarest things a person can project. Here's the other side of this. Emotional reactivity doesn't just cost you credibility with other people. It costs you access to your own thinking. When you're flooded, when the emotional response has already moved through you and expressed itself outward, your cognitive capacity drops dramatically. You're no longer operating from your full intelligence. You're operating from the part of your brain that's wired for threat response, for speed, for survival. And that part of your brain is very good at reacting. It's very bad at strategy. This is why the things we say in anger are rarely our best arguments. Why the decisions we make under emotional pressure are rarely our clearest ones. Why the responses we give when we feel cornered or criticized almost never serve us as well as the responses we'd give after a pause. The reactive mind is fast. It is almost never wise. And the people who learn to work with you, or against you, know this. They know that if they can get you emotional, they can get you thinking at a fraction of your actual capacity. They don't need to outthink you. They just need to destabilize you first and let your own reactivity do the rest. This is where emotional power loss becomes genuinely dangerous. Because it isn't just about perception. It isn't just about how others see you. It's about what you're actually capable of accessing when it matters most. A person who can stay calm under pressure has their full mind available, their full intelligence, their full range of options. They can see the situation clearly because they're not inside the emotion, they're alongside it. A person who reacts immediately, visibly, predictably, they're working with a fraction of what they have. And they rarely know it's happening. You've been on both sides of this. You've had conversations where you were completely in control of yourself and completely in command of the exchange. And you've had conversations where something got triggered early and everything after that felt like damage control. The difference between those two experiences isn't intelligence. It isn't preparation. It isn't how much you cared. It's regulation. Section 3. The Anatomy of Manipulation. Nobody thinks they're easy to manipulate. That's precisely what makes it so effective. The people who get manipulated most consistently aren't the naive ones. They aren't the unintelligent ones. They're often the most self-aware people in the room. The empathetic ones, the conscientious ones, the ones who take relationships seriously and genuinely care about being fair. Those qualities, in the wrong dynamic, become handles. Because manipulation doesn't work by overpowering you. It works by using what's already inside you. Your guilt, your need for fairness, your fear of conflict, your desire to be seen as reasonable, and redirecting it. You end up doing what someone else wants while feeling like the decision was entirely your own. That's not an accident. That's the design. Let's take the drama out of this first. When most people hear the word manipulation, they picture something cinematic. A calculating villain, elaborate schemes, obvious malice. Real manipulation is almost never like that. Most of it is quiet, unremarkable. It happens in ordinary conversations, between ordinary people, in moments that don't feel significant while they're occurring. It often comes from people who don't even fully realize they're doing it, who learned these patterns early, found that they worked, and have been running them on autopilot ever since. This is important to understand, because if you're waiting for manipulation to announce itself, you'll miss it every time. It doesn't feel like an attack. It feels like a conversation. There are three primary levers that manipulation, conscious or not, consistently uses. The first is emotion, specifically manufactured emotion. Sudden anger that appears and disappears too cleanly to be genuine. Hurt feelings that arrive precisely when a boundary is being set. Warmth that increases when you're needed and evaporates when you're not. Emotion, in the hands of someone using it strategically, is a pressure system. It's applied to move you toward compliance, toward guilt, toward doubt, and then released once it's done its job. The tell is the timing. Genuine emotion is messy and nonlinear. Manufactured emotion tends to be remarkably well-timed. The second lever is urgency. Pressure that compresses your thinking. Deadlines that appear from nowhere. Decisions that suddenly need to be made right now, before you've had time to think them through, before you've had a chance to consult anyone else. Urgency is extraordinarily effective because it doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like circumstance, like the situation is just genuinely pressing. But urgency, in many cases, is constructed. The timeline is artificial. The pressure is chosen. When you feel suddenly rushed into a decision, that feeling itself is worth examining. Who benefits from you deciding quickly? Who benefits from you not having time to think? The third lever is identity. This one is the most sophisticated and the hardest to defend against because it doesn't push you towards something. It pulls you. It works by activating your self-concept. Your need to see yourself as a good person, a loyal friend, a fair partner, a strong and capable individual. Once your identity is engaged, you'll work very hard to behave consistently with it, even when behaving consistently with it serves someone else's agenda entirely. I just thought you were someone who kept their word. I didn't think you were the kind of person who gives up. After everything, I would have expected more from you. None of those statements are arguments. They're identity hooks. They bypass your reasoning and go straight to your self-image. And they work on thoughtful, principled people especially, because thoughtful, principled people care deeply about who they are. Here's something worth sitting with. Manipulation works best on empathetic people because empathy, by its nature, involves taking on someone else's emotional experience. It involves feeling what they feel, seeing what they see, understanding their position from the inside. That capacity is genuinely valuable. It creates connection. It creates depth. It makes you a better friend, a better partner, a better human being. It also means that when someone presents you with pain, real or performed, you feel the pull to relieve it. When someone expresses disappointment in you, you feel the discomfort of that. When someone frames a situation so that your refusal makes you the villain of the story, you feel the weight of that framing even when you can intellectually see through it. Empathy doesn't make you weak. Unguarded empathy makes you steerable. The goal isn't to become less empathetic. The goal is to become aware of when your empathy is being activated deliberately, and to create just enough space between that activation and your response to ask a single question. Is this real, or is this engineered? That question, asked calmly, internally, without accusation, is one of the most protective things you can develop. Not paranoia, not cynicism, just a quiet pause. A moment of observation before the response. A small gap between what you're feeling and what you decide to do about it. Manipulation collapses in that gap. It depends on immediacy. It depends on your emotion moving faster than your thinking. Give your thinking time to catch up, and the whole architecture starts to become visible. Once you can see it, it loses most of its power. Section 4. Emotional predictability is a vulnerability. Imagine someone handed you a script for a person you know well. Not their words, their reactions. A reliable list of what makes them defensive, what makes them shut down, what makes them over-explain, what makes them agree just to end the discomfort. What topics make them emotional enough that their judgment softens? What kind of tone makes them compliant? What kind of pressure makes them fold? With that script, you wouldn't need to persuade them of anything. You just need to set up the right conditions and let their own patterns do the work. Now ask yourself an uncomfortable question. Does someone already have that script for you? Predictability feels like consistency, and consistency, we're told, is a virtue. Be reliable. Be steady. Be someone people can count on. All of that is true in the right contexts. But emotional predictability is a different thing entirely. It isn't reliability. It's exposure. It's the condition of being so consistent in your reactions that anyone paying attention can calculate your responses in advance and build their behavior around them. Consistent values are a strength. Consistent emotional triggers are a vulnerability. The distinction matters enormously because most people confuse the two, and in doing so, they defend their predictability as though it were a matter of integrity. This is just who I am. I react this way because I care. I get angry about this because it matters to me. All of that may be true, and none of it changes the fact that a reaction someone can count on is a lever someone can pull. Here's how this plays out in practice. Someone knows that you can't stand being accused of not caring. So when they want something from you, they don't ask directly. They frame the situation so that saying no makes you look indifferent. They don't demand. They imply. And you, unable to tolerate that implication about yourself, give them what they want just to disprove it. They didn't convince you. Your own trigger convinced you. Someone knows that you go quiet when you feel criticized, that you withdraw and stop asserting yourself. So in a negotiation, they introduce criticism early, not because it's relevant, but because it changes your posture. You spend the rest of the conversation slightly defensive, slightly contracted, less willing to hold your position, because part of your mind is still processing the criticism rather than focusing on the actual issue. They didn't outmaneuver you. They just knew which lever to touch first. Someone knows that you feel responsible for other people's emotional states. So when they're unhappy or perform unhappiness convincingly enough, you absorb it as your problem to solve. You adjust your behavior. You make accommodations. You soften positions you should have held, not because you were forced to, because you were triggered into it. The most important thing to understand about emotional predictability is that you don't need a sophisticated manipulator to exploit it. Life exploits it. Ordinary conversations exploit it. Routine conflicts exploit it. The colleague who doesn't even particularly dislike you, but has simply learned that a certain kind of comment will throw you off. They'll use that information without malice, without strategy, almost without awareness. Because human beings unconsciously optimize for outcomes in social interactions. And if a certain input reliably produces a certain output from you, that input will get used. You don't have to be targeted to be steered. You just have to be predictable. So what does it actually mean to become less predictably reactive? It doesn't mean becoming unpredictable in your values, your commitments, or your character. Those should be consistent. It means creating enough internal space that your emotional responses stop being automatic, stop being things that happen to you, and start being things you have some degree of choice over. It means knowing your triggers well enough that when one gets activated, you recognize it before it fully takes over. Not suppressing it, not pretending it isn't there, just seeing it, naming it internally. Creating that fraction of a second between the stimulus and the response where you still have agency. That fraction of a second is everything. Start with an honest audit. What are the accusations you genuinely cannot ignore? The ones that, no matter how clearly you know they're being used tactically, still land? The ones that make you want to defend yourself even when defending yourself serves no one but the person accusing you? What are the emotional states that reliably change your decision-making? When you feel guilty, how does your behavior shift? When you feel dismissed, what do you start doing differently? When you feel responsible for someone's unhappiness, How far does that sense of responsibility extend? What are the social pressures that override your judgment? The fear of being seen as difficult, the discomfort of sustained conflict, the need to be understood that sometimes makes you explain yourself long past the point of usefulness. These aren't character flaws. They're human responses. But they're also, if left unexamined, the exact architecture of your manipulability. Knowing them is the first defensive move. Because here's what changes when you know your own map well enough to guard it. You stop being surprised by your reactions. You start seeing the setup before the play completes. You notice when someone is engineering a situation designed to activate a specific response in you, and that noticing alone disrupts the sequence. You can't be predictably triggered by something you've already anticipated. The person who knows their own emotional architecture is genuinely harder to steer, not because they feel less, but because their feelings no longer move faster than their awareness. That awareness is the beginning of real protection. Section 5. The fake confidence trap. There's a version of confidence that needs the room to survive. It needs agreement. It needs validation. It needs to win the argument, land the joke, hold the attention, establish dominance in some visible way. It needs other people to behave in ways that confirm it, and when they don't, it wobbles. It gets louder, or it collapses. Either way, the room notices. This is the version most people have been taught to perform. And it's almost entirely useless under real pressure. We learn early that confidence looks like certainty, like volume, like the person who speaks first and longest, who takes up space, who never seems to doubt themselves in public. We watch that person get attention, and we assume the attention means the confidence is real. It usually isn't. What's usually happening is something simpler and considerably less impressive. The person who dominates the room, who asserts loudly and defends aggressively, they're managing anxiety. The performance of confidence is, in most cases, a defense mechanism, a way of controlling the environment enough that the internal instability doesn't get exposed. Watch what happens when that person gets genuinely challenged. Not socially, psychologically. When someone calmly and precisely questions their position. When the room doesn't respond the way they expected. When the validation doesn't arrive on schedule, the mask shifts. Sometimes it gets louder. Sometimes it gets hostile. Sometimes it simply falls. Because it was always load-bearing. It needed constant external support to stay upright. Real confidence doesn't work that way. Real confidence is, at its core, an internal reference point. It doesn't consult the room to find out if it's valid. It doesn't require the argument to go a certain way, or the other person to concede, or the audience to approve. It exists independently of all of that, which means it stays stable when all of that goes wrong. This is why genuinely confident people are so hard to destabilize. You can challenge them and they don't shatter, they engage. You can criticize them and they don't crumble, they consider. You can withhold approval and they don't chase it, they continue. The thing you're trying to touch when you push against them isn't there where you expected it to be. They've moved their center of gravity somewhere you can't reach. Here's what performed confidence reveals about the person performing it. Every display of dominance is a communication. It says, I need you to see me as powerful because I'm not certain I am. Every aggressive defense of a position says, this position is load-bearing for my self-image and I can't afford to lose it. Every need to have the last word says, I don't feel finished until I've re-established something that got threatened. None of that is judgment. It's mechanics. And once you understand the mechanics, you see it everywhere. The manager who can't take feedback without reframing it as an attack. The person in every group conversation who subtly steers every topic back toward their own expertise. The individual who goes cold in punishing the moment they feel overlooked. These aren't powerful people protecting their power. These are insecure people protecting their image of themselves. And images, unlike real foundations, require constant maintenance. The trap, the specific trap this section is named for, is that most people trying to become more confident aim for the performed version. They practice assertiveness as a behavior rather than an internal state. They learn to speak more loudly, hold eye contact longer, take up more physical space, use more declarative sentences, all of which can be useful, but only if there's something real underneath it. Applied to a hollow foundation, those techniques are just a better costume. And a better costume doesn't hold under pressure. It holds until the pressure arrives, and then everyone, including you, discovers what was actually underneath. So what does the real version actually look like? It looks quieter than you'd expect. Genuinely confident people don't need to establish themselves at the beginning of an interaction. They're comfortable letting other people talk first, letting other people take the visible space, letting the room form without them at the center of it. They're not performing indifference. They're genuinely untroubled by not being the most prominent presence in the room. They're also comfortable with being wrong, not performatively humble, genuinely capable of updating their position when presented with better information, without experiencing that update as a defeat. Because their self-worth isn't indexed to being right. It's located somewhere more stable than that. They tolerate ambiguity without needing to resolve it immediately. They can sit with not knowing, not being certain, not having the answer, without that uncertainty triggering visible distress. And perhaps most distinctively, they don't explain themselves unless explanation is actually useful. The compulsive over-explainer is almost always someone whose confidence is externally dependent, someone who needs you to understand their reasoning because your understanding is part of what makes them feel okay. The person with genuine internal stability explains when it serves the conversation and stops when it doesn't. That economy of self-disclosure is one of the clearest signals of real confidence you'll ever observe. Here's the practical implication of all of this. If you've been working on your confidence by trying to perform it better, by getting louder, more assertive, more visibly certain, you've been building on sand. The work isn't in the performance. The work is in reducing your dependence on external validation until your internal state stops requiring the room's cooperation to stay stable. That's a slower build. It's less immediately visible. It doesn't get the same short-term social feedback that a strong performance does, but it holds. Under criticism, under pressure, under genuine attack, it holds. And the person who holds when everyone else is rattled is the person the room quietly orients around. Not because they demanded it, because they earned it from the inside out. Section 6. The nervous system is the battlefield. You can know everything in this audiobook intellectually. You can understand manipulation mechanics. You can recognize emotional predictability. You can see performed confidence for exactly what it is. You can have every concept fully mapped and clearly articulated in your mind. And then someone says the right thing at the right moment, in the right tone, and your heart rate spikes, your chest tightens, your thinking narrows, and every strategy you had prepared evaporates. Not because you weren't smart enough, not because you didn't care enough, but because your body moved faster than your mind. And once the body goes, the mind follows. This is why the nervous system is where everything actually gets decided. There's a process that happens in the brain during acute stress that's worth understanding, not in clinical detail, but in practical terms, because once you see it, you'll recognize it in real time. When your brain perceives a threat, social, psychological, or physical, a structure called the amygdala activates before your conscious mind has had time to fully process what's happening. It doesn't wait for your evaluation. It doesn't ask for your opinion. It reads the environment, detects a pattern that resembles danger, and fires a response. That response floods your system with stress hormones. Your heart rate increases. Your breathing shallows. Blood moves away from your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational thinking, long-term planning, nuanced judgment, and toward your muscles and your survival systems. In a physical emergency, this is extraordinarily useful. In a difficult conversation, it is catastrophic, because the moment your prefrontal cortex goes offline, even partially, you lose access to your best thinking. You lose the ability to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously. You lose the subtle judgment that tells you when to speak and when to stay quiet, when to push and when to withdraw. You're left with a narrowed, reactive, threat-focused version of your intelligence. And that version, however fast it is not adequate for the situations that actually matter most in your life. Here's what makes this particularly difficult. The threat doesn't have to be real to produce the response. Your nervous system doesn't distinguish reliably between a physical threat and a social one, between genuine danger and perceived danger, between someone who is actually attacking you and someone who is simply using a tone that resembles a past attack. The response is the same. The chemistry is the same. The cognitive narrowing is the same. This is why certain people can send you from calm to flooded in seconds, not because they have power over you intellectually, but because they've learned, consciously or not, to speak in a register that activates your threat response before your rational mind can intervene. They're not outthinking you. They're getting underneath your thinking. So the question becomes, how do you train a system that moves faster than thought? The answer isn't to think faster. The answer is to regulate the body before the thought is needed. Calmness, at a physiological level, is not a mental attitude. It's a physical state. It's characterized by a lower resting heart rate, slower and deeper breathing, reduced cortisol levels, and increased activity in the prefrontal cortex. And crucially, it can be trained deliberately, consistently, over time, through specific practices that shift your nervous system's baseline. The simplest and most evidence-supported of these is breath control, not deep breathing as a relaxation technique, though that has value, but the specific practice of extending your exhale beyond your inhale. When you exhale for longer than you inhale, you activate the parasympathetic nervous system, the branch responsible for calm, for recovery, for the physiological state in which clear thinking becomes possible again. For counts in, 6 or 7 counts out, done consistently, even for 90 seconds, this shifts your internal state measurably. This isn't mystical. It's mechanical. And the fact that it's mechanical means it's available to you in any situation, at any moment, without equipment, without anyone else knowing you're doing it. There's another dimension to this that rarely gets discussed. Physical stillness communicates psychological stability to others and to yourself. When you're internally activated, your body moves. Small movements, shifts in posture, changes in facial expression, adjustments in breathing that are visible if someone is watching closely. The body leaks the internal state constantly, and those leaks are readable. But the relationship runs in both directions. Deliberately slowing your physical movement, consciously reducing the small fidgets and adjustments, grounding your posture, slowing your gestures, sends a signal back to your nervous system. The body and mind are in continuous conversation, and the direction of information isn't only top-down. When you physically perform stillness, your nervous system begins to produce it. This is why the people who appear calmest under pressure often seem almost unnaturally still. Not rigid, still. There's a quality of physical groundedness that accompanies genuine internal regulation, and it can be cultivated by working from the outside in, not just the inside out. The practical implication is this. If you want to be harder to destabilize in conversations that matter, in confrontations, in negotiations, in the moments when someone is deliberately trying to push you off balance, the preparation doesn't start when the conversation starts. It starts in the hours and days before, in the baseline state of your nervous system. A person who has been sleeping poorly, eating erratically, living in chronic low-grade stress, that person has a much narrower window before they flood. The threshold is lower. The recovery is slower. The gap between stimulus and response is thinner. A person who has been consistently regulating, who sleeps, who breathes deliberately, who has built physical stillness as a practice, that person has a wider window. More capacity before the flood, faster recovery after it. A larger gap in which choice is still possible. You are not just a mind navigating social situations. You are a body that either supports your mind or undermines it, and which one it does is largely within your control. Section 7. How manipulators trigger reactions. There's a moment in every manipulation sequence where it could be interrupted. It's brief. It's easy to miss. And most people miss it, not because they're not paying attention, but because they don't know what they're looking for. This section is about learning what to look for, not to become paranoid, not to start treating every difficult conversation as an attack, but to develop the pattern recognition that turns a previously invisible process into something you can see in real time, And seeing it, as we've established, is most of what's needed to stop it working. The first technique is guilt induction. This is probably the most widely used emotional lever in existence, because guilt is one of the most uncomfortable feelings a socially connected human being can experience. We're wired to repair ruptures. We're wired to respond to the signal that we've caused harm. That wiring is genuinely good. It's what makes cooperation and trust possible. It's also what makes guilt induction so effective. The move looks like this. A problem that belongs to the other person gets quietly transferred to you. Their unhappiness becomes your responsibility. Their poor decision becomes something you could have prevented. Their reaction to your entirely reasonable behavior becomes evidence that you did something wrong. The transfer is rarely explicit. It happens through implication, through a certain tone, through the carefully chosen silence that follows something you've said, through the look that communicates disappointment without stating it directly. And because you're an empathetic person, because you take seriously the possibility that you've caused harm, you accept the transfer. You start carrying something that was never yours to carry. The tell, guilt that arrives faster than the evidence for it. If you feel guilty before you've had time to actually evaluate whether you did anything wrong, that speed is the signal. Genuine guilt follows reflection. Induced guilt precedes it. The second technique is identity attack. We covered this briefly in the manipulation section, but it deserves more precise examination here because it operates at a depth that makes it particularly hard to defend against in the moment. An identity attack doesn't argue with your position. It argues with your character. It doesn't say you're wrong about this. It says the kind of person who does this is not who you think you are. It activates your self-concept directly and makes the disagreement personal in a way that pure logic never could. I just didn't think you were someone who gives up. I guess I expected more loyalty from you. Most people wouldn't be okay with this, but you seem fine. Each of those sentences is designed to produce a specific reaction, the urgent need to prove that the implied characterization is wrong. And in trying to disprove it, you take on exactly the behavior the other person wanted. You didn't agree to their request. You agreed to protect your self-image. The defense is simple in theory and genuinely difficult in practice. Notice when the argument has shifted from the issue to your character. When that shift happens, you don't have to follow it. You can name it internally, this is an identity hook, and return to the actual issue without engaging the bait. The third technique is DARVO. This acronym, deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender, describes a sequence so disorienting that even people who know about it find it difficult to navigate in real time. It works like this. You raise a concern. Instead of engaging with it, the other person denies the behavior you've described, attacks you for raising it, and then reframes the situation so that they are the injured party and you are the one who has caused harm. In under 60 seconds, you've gone from the person with a legitimate concern to the person who is cruel, unfair, and causing damage. The disorientation this produces is genuine, because suddenly you're defending yourself against accusations you didn't arrive with, managing the other person's performed distress, and trying to remember what your original point even was, all simultaneously. The conversation has been completely hijacked, and it happened so fast you didn't see the turn. The stabilizer here is simple but requires discipline. Hold your original point. Write it down before difficult conversations, if necessary. When the reversal happens, and once you know this pattern, you'll start seeing it everywhere. Return to the original point calmly. Don't defend against the counterattack. Don't engage the reversed narrative. Just return. I hear that you're upset. I want to come back to what I originally raised. That sentence, delivered calmly, dismantles the sequence. The fourth technique is strategic withdrawal. This one is subtle enough that it often doesn't register as manipulation at all. It looks like distance, like coldness, like the other person simply becoming less available, less warm, less engaged, not in response to anything dramatic, but as a kind of ambient pressure. The message being sent, without words, is, your behavior is costing you my approval. And for people whose emotional security is even partially dependent on that approval, the withdrawal produces exactly the intended effect. They adjust, they soften, They start trying to earn back the warmth without fully understanding why they're doing it. This technique is particularly powerful in close relationships, because in close relationships, the other person's emotional temperature matters to you. It's supposed to matter, and that matching becomes the lever. The counter is developing what can only be described as a stable internal temperature, a sense of your own okayness that doesn't require the other person's warmth to maintain itself. Not indifference to the relationship, but enough internal stability that a withdrawal of approval doesn't send you into pursuit mode automatically. Here's what all 4 of these techniques have in common. They don't overpower you. They redirect you. They work with your own psychology, your empathy, your self-concept, your need for connection, and use it to move you somewhere you wouldn't have chosen to go. Which means the defense, in every case, is the same. The pause, the internal naming, the moment of observation before the response. What just happened here? What am I being moved toward? And who benefits from me moving there? Those questions, asked in the gap before you react, change everything. Because a move you can see is a move you can choose not to take. Section 8. The power of delayed response. The first response that arrives in a charged moment is almost never your best one. It's your fastest one. And fast, in high-stakes conversations, is rarely the same thing as good. Fast is reflexive. Fast is emotional. Fast is the response that feels most urgent precisely because it's been triggered rather than chosen. Because something landed, activated a reaction, and now the reaction wants to move outward immediately, before you've had time to think about whether outward is actually where you want it to go. Most people send it anyway, and most people pay for it. In damaged conversations, in positions conceded before they needed to be, in words that can't be taken back, and relationships that absorb the cost of them quietly, over time. The pause is the alternative, not hesitation. Not weakness, not the absence of a response. A decision. Here's what almost nobody understands about silence in a difficult conversation. It doesn't feel neutral to the person waiting for your response. It feels like pressure. When you pause, genuinely, calmly, without visible agitation, the other person experiences that pause as something they need to fill. The silence creates discomfort, and discomfort, for most people, produces speech. They elaborate. They over-explain. They soften a position they just stated firmly. They add qualifications that reveal uncertainty. They say things they hadn't planned to say, because the silence pushed them toward volume as a way of relieving the tension. You haven't said a word, and you've already learned more about where they actually stand than they intended to show you. This is why experienced negotiators treat silence as a primary tool rather than an absence of one. The person who can tolerate silence longer controls the informational flow of the conversation. They're not passive, they're harvesting. There's a second function of the delayed response that operates closer to home. When you pause before responding in a moment of genuine emotional activation, you interrupt the automatic sequence. Remember the map we discussed at the beginning. The emotional trigger produces a predictable response, and that predictability is exactly what makes you steerable. The pause disrupts the sequence between trigger and response. It inserts a small but crucial gap. And in that gap, something important becomes possible. You can choose your response rather than simply produce it. This sounds simple. It is not simple. In a moment of genuine activation, when someone has said something that lands on a real trigger, when you feel accused or dismissed or cornered, the pull toward immediate response is physical. It feels like pressure in the chest. Like something that needs to be released. Like staying quiet is somehow accepting what just happened. It isn't. Silence is not agreement. Calm is not concession. And the moment you internalize that distinction, the pause stops feeling like restraint and starts feeling like advantage. Watch what happens in a heated exchange between two people who are both reacting immediately. The conversation accelerates. Each response triggers the next. The emotional temperature rises steadily because each person is matching and then slightly exceeding the intensity of what they just received. Position hardens against position. The original issue gets buried under layers of reactivity until neither person can remember exactly what started it. Nobody wins that conversation. Both people leave it diminished by what was said, by how they said it, by the gap between who they intended to be in the exchange and who they actually were. Now watch what happens when one person in that exchange simply refuses to accelerate. They pause. They respond at a lower temperature than what they received. They don't match the emotional intensity. They answer it with something slower and quieter. The other person escalates again. They pause again. They respond again at the same measured pace. Something shifts. It usually takes 2 or 3 cycles. But the conversation can't sustain its acceleration without both parties fueling it. One person's refusal to match the energy gradually pulls the entire exchange toward the calmer register. That person controlled the conversation, not through aggression, not through volume, through the deliberate, disciplined application of less. The calmest person in a conflict sets the ceiling for how heated it gets. There's a practical question here worth addressing directly. How do you actually pause when every instinct is telling you to respond immediately? The first technique is physical. Before you speak, exhale. Not dramatically, just a single, quiet, controlled breath out. This serves 2 functions simultaneously. It activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which slightly reduces the physiological activation you're experiencing, and it buys you approximately 2 to 3 seconds without the pause becoming socially visible or awkward. 2 to 3 seconds is enough. Not to formulate a perfect response, but to ask the one question that changes everything. Is what I'm about to say going to serve me, or just relieve the pressure I'm feeling right now? If the answer is the second one, you pause longer. The second technique is to respond to the emotion before the content. Not to engage it, to acknowledge it. That's worth thinking about. Let me consider that for a moment. These sentences buy time without conceding anything. They signal that you've heard without indicating what you're going to do with what you heard. And they're disarming in a way that a sharp, immediate response rarely is. Because most people are braced for impact when they've said something charged, and quiet acknowledgement lands differently than they expected. Here's the deeper truth underneath all of this. The person who responds last controls the frame of the conversation. Not because they had the last word in some petty sense, but because the final response is the one that sets the tone for what comes next, the silence that follows it, the room's reaction to it, the way both parties feel as they carry the conversation forward. The person who can wait, who can absorb, observe, breathe, and then respond from a place of choice rather than activation. That person is almost always operating at an advantage. Not a loud advantage, not a visible one, a quiet one, the kind that compounds over time, across hundreds of conversations, into a reputation for being someone who simply cannot be rattled into a mistake. Section 9. Becoming emotionally unreadable. There's a fear that lives underneath this entire subject. Most people, when they start thinking seriously about emotional control, about reducing their reactivity, guarding their responses, becoming harder to read, arrive at a quiet worry they don't always articulate directly. If I do this, will I become cold? It's worth addressing head-on, because it's the thing that stops people from going all the way with this work. They've met people who controlled their emotions by burying them, who became flat, distant, unreachable, who traded their warmth for a kind of armored numbness that made them safe from manipulation and equally safe from genuine connection. That's not the goal. That's not even close to the goal. What we're building is something entirely different. The distinction that matters is between emotional suppression and emotional discipline. Suppression is the attempt to eliminate the feeling, to push it down, refuse its space, pretend it doesn't exist. It works temporarily, and then it doesn't. Suppressed emotion doesn't disappear. It accumulates. It expresses itself sideways, in ways that are harder to control than the original feeling would have been, in disproportionate reactions to small things, in a baseline coldness that seeps into interactions you didn't intend it to reach, in the sudden eruption of something that was supposed to be gone. Suppression is also exhausting. It requires constant maintenance. It takes genuine cognitive and emotional resources to keep something down that wants to move, and those resources are then unavailable for everything else. Discipline is different. Emotional discipline isn't the elimination of feeling. It's the development of choice about what gets expressed, when, and to whom. The feeling is there. You're aware of it. You're not pretending otherwise. You're simply making a decision, sometimes in a fraction of a second, about whether this moment, this audience, this context is the right one for that feeling to become visible. That's not coldness. That's wisdom. Here's what emotional leakage actually looks like, because most people underestimate how much they're broadcasting without intending to. It's in the micro expressions that cross your face before you've decided on a response. The brief flash of irritation before the neutral expression reassembles. The slight tightening around the eyes when something lands badly. The flicker of anxiety before you override it with composure. It's in your vocal tone. The almost imperceptible shift in pitch when you're defensive. The slight quickening of pace when you're anxious. The flatness that enters your voice when you're trying too hard to seem unbothered. It's in your body. The stillness that becomes too deliberate and therefore signals effort. The crossed arms that arrive when you feel threatened. The backward lean that happens when you want distance from what's being said. Most people are producing a continuous, largely unconscious commentary on their internal state, and some people are very good at reading it. This isn't paranoia. It's just the reality of human communication, most of which has never been verbal. We evolved reading each other's bodies and faces long before we evolved language. That capacity doesn't disappear because we've decided to use words. So what does it actually mean to reduce that leakage without reducing the feeling? It starts with awareness. You cannot manage something you haven't first noticed. The practice begins with simply observing your own physical responses in real time, not to suppress them, but to develop familiarity with them. To know what happens in your body when you feel criticized, when you feel dismissed, when something activates the threat response. That familiarity creates a small but crucial gap. You start to recognize the physical precursor to the visible expression, the moment just before the micro-expression fires, the breath that changes just before the vocal tone shifts. And in that recognition, you have a fraction of a second of choice. Not always enough, but more than you had before. Over time, with practice, that gap widens. There's a quality that genuinely emotionally disciplined people have that's worth naming precisely, because it's often misread. They seem comfortable with ambiguity. When something charged is said in their presence, they don't immediately signal how they've received it. They don't reassure the room that they're fine, or signal that they're offended, or rush to clarify their position. They simply hold it. They let the moment exist without immediately resolving its tension. This is disarming in a way that's hard to fully explain until you've experienced it. When you say something designed to provoke, or even something innocently ambiguous, and the other person simply receives it without visible reaction, without immediately telling you how it landed, you lose information. You don't know where you stand. You don't know what they're thinking. And that uncertainty is, for most people, uncomfortable enough to produce more speech, more explanation, more disclosure than they intended. The unreadable person, just by being still, gathers information while giving none away. Here's the important rehumanizing point in all of this. Becoming emotionally unreadable to people who would use your emotions against you does not require becoming unreadable to everyone. Emotional discipline is not a single setting. It's a graduated capacity. The same person can be genuinely open and emotionally present in relationships built on real trust, can be warm, vulnerable, expressive, fully themselves, while maintaining a much quieter emotional surface in contexts where that openness would be exploited. This is not inconsistency. This is appropriate calibration. The goal is never to become someone who feels nothing and shows nothing. The goal is to become someone who chooses, consciously, deliberately, with full awareness, what gets shown, to whom, in what context. That choice is what protection actually looks like. Not armor, not distance, just the quiet, composed decision about what is yours to keep and what is safe to share. Section 10. Self-control in conflict and under pressure. Everything we've covered until now has been preparation. This is the exam. Because emotional discipline in a quiet room, with no one pushing, with nothing at stake, that's not discipline. That's just the absence of pressure. The real question has always been what happens when someone is actively, deliberately, skillfully pushing on the exact place where you're most likely to break. And they know where that place is. They've watched you long enough. They've cataloged your reactions. They know which accusation makes you defensive, which tone makes you shrink, which tactic pulls you out of your clarity and into your feelings so fast that by the time you've reoriented, the conversation has already moved somewhere you didn't choose to go. That's the real test. And most people fail it, not because they're weak, but because they were never taught what passing actually looks like. The first thing to understand about deliberate destabilization is that it has a goal. Someone escalating in a conflict isn't simply emotional. Even when it looks purely reactive, escalation is almost always functional. It's designed to move you somewhere, to make you defensive, to make you smaller, to make you so focused on managing the emotional temperature of the exchange that you lose sight of your original position entirely. The chaos is the strategy. When you understand this, something important shifts. The escalation stops feeling like something you need to respond to and starts feeling like something you need to observe. The anger, the accusations, the sudden introduction of old grievances, the theatrical disappointment, all of it is information. It's telling you what the other person needs you to feel in order to get what they want from this interaction. And once you can see the function of the chaos, you stop being consumed by it. The most powerful move available to you in an escalating conflict is the one that feels most counterintuitive. You slow down, not physically walking away, not shutting down, not the cold withdrawal that communicates contempt, but a genuine, visible, deliberate reduction in your pace. Your speaking slows, your body settles, your voice drops, not in volume as a dominance display, but in register, in intensity, in the quality of urgency it carries. You become, in the middle of the storm, the stillest thing in the room. This works for two reasons simultaneously. The first is physiological. Slowing your external behavior sends regulatory signals to your nervous system, which slightly reduces your own activation and keeps your prefrontal cortex more online than it would otherwise be. You're not just performing calm, you're producing it from the outside in. The second reason is social. An escalating person needs a matching escalation to sustain momentum. They need the exchange to accelerate, because acceleration produces the emotional flooding that makes you most manageable. When you refuse to accelerate, when you respond to heat with something slower and quieter, you deny them the fuel the conflict needs to reach the temperature where you stop thinking clearly. You can't force someone to de-escalate, but you can refuse to co-escalate. And that refusal, sustained calmly, changes the architecture of the entire exchange. There's a specific moment in conflict that deserves particular attention. It's the moment when staying calm starts to feel like losing. You know this moment. The other person is loud, and you're quiet. They're making accusations, and you're not matching their intensity. From the outside, and from inside your own head, it can look and feel like you're conceding. Like your composure is being read as weakness. Like the person who's angrier is winning simply by being angrier. This feeling is one of the most reliable manipulation tools in existence. It's designed to pull you out of your composure by making composure feel costly. Here's the truth underneath it. Anger is not a scoring system. Volume is not an argument. The person who escalates hardest in a conflict has not made a stronger point. They've simply made a louder one. And loudness, to anyone observing with any degree of clarity, signals the absence of a better option. Your calm, in that moment, is not weakness. It's the most precise communication available to you. It says, without words, nothing you're doing is reaching the place you're trying to reach. That message, delivered through sustained composure rather than stated directly, lands with a weight that no argument could replicate. Here's what self-control in conflict ultimately produces, not as a performance, but as a genuine, practiced capacity. It produces options. The reactive person has one option: respond to what just happened. They're always one step behind, always answering the last move, always operating inside the frame someone else constructed. The composed person has the full board available. They can respond. They can redirect. They can ask a question that reframes the entire exchange. They can introduce silence. They can name what's happening without accusation. They can disengage cleanly, without drama, without leaving the door open for pursuit. They're not playing the game that was set up for them. They're deciding whether to play at all. Section 11. Building internal stability that lasts. Everything in this audiobook can be understood intellectually in a single sitting. None of it becomes real in a single sitting. The concepts land quickly. The recognition is immediate. You hear something and think, yes, that's true. I've seen that. I've lived that. The understanding arrives fast. The change is slower. It has to be, because what we're actually talking about isn't learning new information. It's rebuilding something structural, the internal architecture that either holds under pressure or doesn't. And structural change doesn't happen through insight alone. It happens through repetition, through practice, through the slow accumulation of small decisions made differently over time until the new pattern becomes more available than the old one. This section is about how to build that deliberately. There are 3 pillars that durable internal stability rests on. Not techniques, not tactics. Pillars, foundational elements that, when present together, create a base that pressure genuinely struggles to reach. The first is identity clarity. Most emotional instability, at its root, comes from uncertainty about who you are. Not in a philosophical sense, but in a practical one. Uncertainty about what you value, about what you're willing to accept and what you're not, about where you actually stand on the things that matter most to you. When that clarity is absent, every challenging conversation becomes an identity question. Someone pushes against your position and you don't just defend a position, you defend yourself, because the position and the self have become entangled. Someone criticizes your decision and it doesn't just feel like feedback. It feels like an attack on your worth because you haven't separated the two. Identity clarity creates separation. When you know, genuinely, not performatively, what you value and who you are, challenges to your behavior stop feeling like challenges to your existence. Someone can disagree with you without destabilizing you. Someone can criticize your choice without threatening your sense of self. The work here is simple and unglamorous, regular, honest self-examination. Not in crisis, in quiet. What do I actually value? What am I willing to compromise on? And what am I not? What kind of person am I trying to become? And does my behavior in difficult moments reflect that? Those questions, asked consistently over time, build a self-concept stable enough to withstand pressure without requiring external validation to hold it together. The second pillar is values anchoring. This is related to identity clarity, but distinct from it. Where identity clarity is about knowing who you are, values anchoring is about having that knowledge available in real time. In the middle of a difficult conversation, under genuine pressure, when the emotional activation is high and the clearest thinking is hardest to access. Values anchoring means having a small number of core principles that function as reference points when everything else is unclear. Not a long list of virtues, a short, personally specific set of commitments that you return to when you feel yourself drifting. I don't make decisions from anger. I don't say things I'll need to retract. I don't abandon a position because someone is uncomfortable with it. These aren't rules imposed from outside. They're chosen deliberately, internalized deeply, and practiced consistently enough that they become available automatically, even when your prefrontal cortex is partially offline and the pressure is high. They function as an anchor in exactly the way an anchor functions, not preventing all movement, but preventing drift past the point of no return. The third pillar is nervous system baseline. We covered the mechanics of this in Section 6, the physiological infrastructure of emotional regulation. But it belongs here too, as a structural element, because everything else in this audiobook is built on top of it. A chronically dysregulated nervous system undermines every other form of stability. It doesn't matter how clear your identity is or how well anchored your values are. If your baseline state is one of chronic stress, poor sleep, and physical depletion, your threshold for flooding is low, your recovery is slow, and the gap between stimulus and response is thin. Building nervous system baseline isn't dramatic. It's consistent sleep. It's regular physical movement. It's deliberate breathing practice, not in crisis, but as a daily maintenance activity. It's reducing the chronic low-grade stimulation, the constant phone checking, the background noise, the perpetual low-level urgency that keeps the system activated even when nothing acute is happening. This is the least glamorous part of emotional discipline. It's also the most foundational. You cannot build a stable psychological structure on a dysregulated physiological base. The body is the ground everything else stands on. Here's what these three pillars produce together. They produce what can only be described as a settled quality. A sense of internal okayness that doesn't depend on external circumstances to justify it. That isn't contingent on winning the argument, or being understood, or having the other person concede, or the situation resolving the way you want it. It's just there, underneath everything. Available. This is what people are actually responding to when they describe someone as genuinely calm. They're not describing the absence of emotion. They're describing the presence of something solid underneath the emotion, something that the emotion moves across without destabilizing. That quality is not a personality trait you either have or don't. It's constructed, deliberately, over time, through the consistent application of these three pillars, until stability stops being something you perform and starts being something you simply are. There will still be moments where you lose it, where someone finds the exact pressure point at the exact wrong moment and the composure breaks, where you say something you regret or react in a way that hands them the map you've been working to guard. Those moments don't erase the work. They're part of it. The measure of internal stability isn't the absence of those moments. It's the recovery time. How long before you return to yourself? How quickly the settled quality reasserts itself after the disruption? How soon you're back on the ground you've built, steady, clear, available? That return, practiced enough, eventually becomes faster than the disruption itself. And when that happens, you've built something that genuinely lasts. Section 12. The calm that changes everything. There's a moment, and you'll know it when it happens, where someone tries to destabilize you and simply can't. They use the tone that used to work. They introduce the accusation that used to pull you off balance. They apply the pressure that used to produce the reaction they needed. And this time, something different happens. Nothing. Not the cold nothing of someone who is shut down. Not the tense nothing of someone white-knuckling their way through composure. Just genuine stillness. A quiet that comes from somewhere real. A stability that the pressure slides off of because there's nothing for it to grip. That moment changes the way you see yourself permanently. Not because you won something. Not because you defeated someone. But because you discovered, through direct experience, that you are harder to reach than you used to be. That the place they were aiming for has moved. Deeper, quieter, somewhere they no longer have access to. That discovery doesn't leave you. Here's what changes in the world around you when the internal change is real. People feel it before they can articulate it. There's no announcement required. No new performance to adopt. The shift is internal, but its effects are social, immediate, measurable, and largely outside your control to prevent. People start bringing you different kinds of conversations. The ones that matter more. The ones they don't take to people they're not sure can hold them. Because calm people are rare enough that when someone finds one, they return to them. For the quality of thinking that calm makes possible. For the steadiness that makes honesty feel safe. The relationships that were built on managing your emotions quietly fall away or recalibrate. Some people will not know what to do with a version of you they cannot destabilize. They'll try harder, briefly. And when that doesn't work either, they'll either adjust to the new dynamic or move towards someone more reactive, someone whose emotional responses are still available to be used. Let them. Something else shifts too, something more personal. The internal noise gets quieter. A significant portion of psychological suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from our own reactivity to what happens to us. The rumination after the argument. The replaying of the conversation where you said too much. The anticipatory anxiety before difficult interactions. The dread of your own reactions as much as anyone else's behavior. When the reactions become more chosen, that suffering reduces. Not because life gets easier, but because you stop adding your own volatility to whatever difficulty arrives. The situation is what it is. Your response is now more deliberate. The gap between those two things, between what happens and what you do with it, becomes a place of genuine freedom rather than just another source of pressure. That freedom is quiet. It doesn't announce itself, but it is, in practical daily terms, one of the most significant improvements in quality of life available to a human being. The person you are becoming, through this work, through the slow and unglamorous practice of emotional discipline, is not a colder version of you. They're a cleaner version, clearer, more present, more genuinely available to the people and moments that deserve your full attention. Because your attention is no longer constantly being consumed by the management of your own reactions. They're warmer in the ways that matter, because warmth offered from a stable place lands differently than warmth offered from need. Connection chosen freely is different from connection driven by the anxiety of approval. They're harder, not in the brittle sense, in the durable sense. The kind of hard that comes from having built something real on the inside, something that pressure tests and confirms rather than threatens. You started this listen as someone handing out a map, showing people, through your reactions, your triggers, your predictable responses, exactly where you could be reached. You're finishing it with something different. Not a perfect map guarded flawlessly, not an impenetrable wall, but an awareness, a practice, a direction, the direction of someone who reacts less, thinks clearer, controls more, and gets manipulated less, quietly, consistently, permanently. That's not a destination you arrive at once. It's a way of moving through the world. And it has already started, right now.